Welcome back. Protests against new abortion laws have erupted across Poland. The devout Catholic country has outlawed abortions almost completely, including the termination of pregnancies with deformed fetuses. Under the new law, women will be allowed to abort only if they've been raped, in cases of incest, or if their life is in danger. Artie Nasi, a researcher at Civil Society Alliance Civicus, joins me from Johannesburg. Now, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us. So there have been widespread protests last night and today over the near-total ban on abortion after a constitutional tribunal ruling was published. Give us an idea of the scope of the opposition to this ruling and why it's seen as so controversial.
So I think it's firstly important to mention that this is not the first time that the Polish government has tried to severely restrict abortion rights. We go back to 2016 where protests erupted for weeks, and at that time the government actually backed down due to protests. This time, however, the government has been successful. Now, although the ruling came into effect last night, the initial judgment was handed down on the 22nd of October. But this judgment isn't recognized as legal or binding by many people in Poland, including legal experts and human rights defenders. And this is because of the larger context of the ongoing erosion of the rule of law in Poland, as well as judicial independence. Since 2015, the ruling Law and Justice Party has passed a number of legislations and reforms which have significantly reduced judicial independence, thus leading to many questioning the credibility of this constitutional tribunal, considering that actually quite a few appointments came from the ruling party.
Civicus has been documenting and monitoring the protests since October 2020. What can you tell us about what you found thus far?
So the Civicus and Civicus Monitor, we've worked with organizations on the ground, with Polish feminists who are at the front line. And what we have documented since October, since these protests have been ongoing, is that there's been excessive use of police violence, from the use of tear gas and pepper spray to physical violence, where in one case we've seen that a protester's hand was actually broken in 3 different places due to detentions. We've also seen ongoing detentions against protesters. At the moment, the figures stand at just over 100. We know that those figures are much higher and continue to increase as we know that these protests will be ongoing. What is of particular concern to us is the intimidation of protesters by authorities, which include minors. We've seen cases where 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds have been visited by police, interrogated for so-called organizing these protests, and threatened with criminal charges. Journalists who have been covering protests have also faced detentions, and these are some of the concerns that we have raised with international institutions, specifically the European Union as well as its leaders, calling on it to act very urgently and swiftly. I think it's also important to mention that these protests are ongoing in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of the tactics used by police, which include close contact with protesters, detaining them in small confined spaces, often has been said to lead to increased risk of COVID-19 infections.
What will the impact of this ruling be for Polish women in the long run?
So although the ruling was made on the 22nd of October and only came into effect just last night, we've already spoken to many organizations working on abortion in Poland who've said that they've received a number of complaints from women on the ground who have been denied access to abortion. So we've already been seeing the impact of this. Just to give you an idea of what the abortion numbers are in Poland. So there are about 120,000 cases of abortion where women actually have to travel abroad to get abortion because of the already strict laws that existed before this ruling. And then we know that about 40 abortion cases take place a year in relation to cases of rape or incest, as well as when the mother's life is in danger, which tells us that a huge number of abortions are actually due to fetal abnormalities. So this will leave a large number of women without access to abortion care. Those who have the means to travel will be able to do so, but those who don't will be left to pursue backdoor abortions or unsafe methods, thus denying them of an essential right to sexual and reproductive health care.
Well, thank you very much for that update. Certainly a step backwards for human rights in Poland. That was Artie Nasi, researcher from Civicus.